Waitress worked double shifts to pay debt. The man she served was the Creditor Billionaire. The rain had turned the city into a mirror that night, lights from the skyscrapers bleeding down into the puddles that lined the streets. Inside La Fontaine, one of downtown's most exclusive restaurants, a young waitress moved like a quiet storm, swift, precise, and nearly invisible. Her name was Clara Vance, and her world began and ended in that dining room. Every step she took, every smile she forced carried a purpose: survival. The restaurant's elite clientele saw only her polite composure, not the exhaustion beneath it, nor the secret weight that pressed against her chest, the debt that haunted every paycheck she earned. But that night, the man sitting at table 9 was different. He wasn't just wealthy, he was the kind of powerful that didn't need to announce itself. His suit, sharp as glass, caught the low amber light. His expression was unreadable, carved with the precision of a man used to control. His name was Adrian Cole, and unbeknownst to her, he was the one she owed everything to. Before we continue, if you believe love can appear in the most impossible places, between power and humility, between a heart in debt and one that's forgotten how to feel, subscribe and stay with us for stories that still believe in love's power to change people. Clara balanced a tray of wine glasses, unaware that fate was already rewriting the rules of her quiet life. Adrian watched her from across the room, not with arrogance but with a distant curiosity. There was something unusual about her, the way she moved without fear, even in a place that demanded obedience. "Your guest has arrived, sir," murmured his assistant, placing a file discreetly on the table. Adrian opened it, a list of accounts, names, numbers, a portfolio of debts his firm had just acquired. Near the bottom of the page, one name made him pause: Clara Vance, amount owed $4,300. He froze, his eyes lifted again, searching the room, and found her. She was pouring wine at the next table, her fingers steady despite the tremor of fatigue that betrayed her. Her uniform was pressed but worn, her shoes scuffed at the heels, her hair neatly tied back as if order could hold her world together. He leaned back, closing the file. "Of all the places," he murmured. "What is it?" his assistant asked. "Nothing," Adrian said, his gaze fixed on her. "Just a coincidence." But he didn't believe in coincidences. Clara approached his table, unaware of the storm she was walking into. "Good evening, sir. May I start you with something to drink?" Her voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who'd learned that politeness was armor. Adrian looked at her for a moment longer than was appropriate. "A bourbon. Neat." She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice followed her. "Clara, isn't it?" She stopped, startled. "Yes, sir. Have we met?" He smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, just good at remembering names." She didn't press further. In her world, questions could cost jobs. When she returned with his drink, the dining room had quieted. The clink of glassware and the low hum of conversation filled the air like a song she knew by heart. Adrian studied her every move, searching for something he couldn't name. Resentment, fear, maybe recognition, but there was none. Only grace under exhaustion. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, breaking the silence as she set his drink down. 2 years, she said. "Double shifts most nights." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds unsustainable." "It pays the bills," she replied simply, then corrected herself. "Most of them." He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "And what would you do if one of them didn't have to be paid?" Her eyes flicked up, cautious. "I'd assume someone was lying to me." Adrian almost laughed. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him without calculation. He studied her one last time before standing. "Tell your manager dinner's on me tonight and for the staff." She blinked. I don't understand." "You don't have to," he said, already walking away. That night, after the last table was cleared and the staff gathered tiredly for their meal, Clara slipped out into the rain. The manager had confirmed it. The mysterious man had paid the bill for everyone. She should have been grateful, but gratitude didn't erase fear. Because earlier that week she'd received another notice from her creditor, a cold, printed reminder that her payment was late, that someone she'd never met could take everything from her. She thought about that man in the suit, the way he'd looked at her, not like a stranger but like someone reading a page he'd already memorized. She walked faster through the wet streets, clutching her bag close. Her apartment wasn't far, a small room above a laundromat, but the thought wouldn't leave her. What if that man wasn't just generous? What if he knew? At that exact moment, miles away, Adrian sat in his penthouse, the city glittering beneath him like a constellation. The file lay open again, her name staring back at him. He should have dismissed it, should have handed the case to legal, but something about her lingered, the quiet dignity in her eyes, the way she didn't break when the world clearly had. He picked up the phone. "Transfer Clara Vance's account to my personal ledger," he instructed. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, that's irregular. You mean you're taking responsibility for her debt?" Adrian's tone didn't waver. "I mean she no longer owes the firm. She owes me." The words echoed in the empty room. He hung up and poured himself another drink, watching the rain slide down the glass. For years, his empire had been built on numbers, emotionless, transactional, predictable. But tonight, the math had changed. He told himself it was curiosity, that he simply wanted to know why someone like her worked herself to exhaustion for a debt she hadn't even created. But deep down, a quieter truth was already taking root, one that neither of them was ready to face. As the clock struck midnight, Clara sat by her window, staring at the glowing city skyline. Somewhere out there was the man who controlled her future, and she didn't even know his name, but soon she would. And when she did, nothing in either of their lives would ever be the same again. The next morning began like every other for Clara. Too early, too tired, too heavy with the weight of everything she didn't say out loud. The coffee machine in her small kitchen rattled like it was ready to give up, and the single light bulb flickered weakly as she pulled her hair back into a bun. She was used to living on the edge of exhaustion. What she wasn't used to was the feeling that someone was watching her life from the outside. That invisible hand that had paid for dinner. The stranger who knew her name. At La Fontaine, the air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and bread fresh from the oven. Her co-workers talked in whispers about the mysterious man from last night, how he'd tipped enough to pay a week's rent for half the staff. Maybe he was just bored, one of them joked. Rich men throw money around when they don't know what else to do. Clara forced a smile but stayed silent. Her mind kept circling back to his eyes, calm, cold, but strangely curious. She tried to bury the thought beneath the rhythm of the day, the repetition that numbed her. But as the morning rush began, a familiar figure walked through the door. Adrian Cole. He didn't belong there in daylight. He was all sharp lines and quiet gravity, a man whose world operated above the noise. The restaurant manager nearly tripped over himself to greet him. "Mr. Cole, welcome back. A private table?" "No need," Adrian said. "I'll sit at the counter." Clara froze, coffee pot in hand. The counter was her station. As he sat, the sunlight hit his suit, deep navy this time, glowing faintly against the dark marble. His watch glimmered as he folded his hands, glancing at the menu without really reading it. "Morning," he said, voice calm but unmistakably direct. "Good morning, sir," Clara replied, fighting the sudden tightness in her chest. "Coffee? Please." "Black." She poured carefully, pretending not to notice the weight of his gaze. He didn't speak at first. He let the silence stretch, long enough for her to feel the unease she tried to hide. Then casually he asked, "Do you ever rest, Clara?" The question caught her off guard. "Rest doesn't pay debts," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked. "Some debts are heavier than they should be," she frowned. "You talk like you know mine." Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a business card on the counter. It was heavy, embossed in silver. Cole Holdings. "You work for the man who owns half the city," one of the waiters whispered behind her when he noticed the card. Clara's eyes flicked from the name to his face. "You're that Cole?" He nodded once, sipping his coffee as if it meant nothing. "Just Adrian's fine." Her pulse quickened. If she'd known who he was, she might have refused to serve him. Now it was too late. "I don't understand why you're here." He leaned forward slightly. "Maybe I like the coffee." She gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "Right, because billionaires spend their mornings in diners with broken ceiling fans." That made him smile, the first real one she'd seen. "You'd be surprised what money can't buy," he said. Her chest tightened at the hint of sadness in his tone, but before she could respond, a man in a grey suit entered, tense, out of place. He approached Adrian with a folder in hand. "Sir, we need your signature on the Vance file." Clara froze. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his tone did. Cold, controlled. "I told you I'd handle it personally." The man hesitated. "Yes, sir." Her name had hung in the air like a ghost. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she placed the coffee pot down. "Did you just say my name?" Adrian's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. "Yes." "Why?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly. Because I'm your creditor, Clara. Or at least I was. The world seemed to tilt. For a moment she couldn't hear the noise around her, the hiss of steam, the murmur of voices, the clatter of cups, only the ringing in her ears and the sound of her own breath. You, what? I bought your debt, he said simply. Yesterday. She stepped back as if the words themselves had weight. Why would you do that? Because I can, he said, the edge in his voice betraying something darker. Guilt, perhaps, or something he didn't yet understand himself. She looked at him, her jaw tight. You think this makes you my savior? His eyes softened. No, I think it makes me responsible. Responsible, she repeated, voice trembling with anger. You don't even know me. I intend to, he said quietly. She couldn't bear it. The calm certainty, the way he spoke like her life was something he could rearrange with a few signatures. Keep your money, Mr. Cole, she said, turning away. I'll pay what I owe, to whoever owns it. You can't, he said, his voice low but firm. Because it's mine now. She stopped mid-step. The way he said mine, it wasn't possessive, not exactly, but it carried something heavy, unspoken. She faced him again, eyes bright with anger and humiliation. Then you've bought yourself nothing, Mr. Cole, because I don't belong to you. Adrian didn't answer. He watched her walk away, her shoulders squared like armor. The other patrons pretended not to look, but every pair of eyes in the room followed her until the kitchen door closed behind her. He stayed for a while, finishing his coffee in silence. The taste of it was bitter. When he finally stood to leave, his assistant was waiting outside. That went as expected, sir. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, his expression unreadable. No, he said. Better. Better? She's not afraid of me. And that's a good thing? Adrian looked up at the grey morning sky. It's the first honest thing I've seen in years. Inside, Clara sat on the floor of the back hallway, hands trembling, tears she refused to let fall burning her eyes. Because for the first time, the man who held her debt had a face, and that face was unforgettable. But what scared her most wasn't his power. It was the way, even through her anger, a part of her heart had recognized something in his eyes. Loneliness. And that was something she understood all too well. Adrian didn't return for 3 days, but in those days, his presence haunted La Fontaine like a shadow no one dared to name. The staff whispered about him, about the debt, about the way Clara had spoken to him, a waitress standing up to one of the most powerful men in the city. To them it was gossip, to her it was survival. She worked in silence, pouring coffee, clearing tables, smiling when expected, but every clang of a glass, every doorbell chime made her flinch, half expecting to see him again, half praying she wouldn't. When he finally appeared, it was during the dinner shift, when the restaurant glowed with amber light and soft piano music. He didn't come alone this time. 2 men in tailored suits walked behind him, but Adrian's calm presence overpowered them all. Clara's breath caught when she saw him. He looked the same, precise, composed, untouchable, yet something in his eyes was different. She approached slowly, keeping her tone polite but distant. Good evening, Mr. Cole. Table for 3. Just 1, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. The others are waiting outside. That was the kind of authority he carried. Silent, unquestioned. She led him to a corner table. I assume you'll want the usual. I didn't come for coffee, he said. Her pulse quickened. Then why are you here? To offer you a job. Her hands tightened around the menu. I already have one. You won't after tonight, he said calmly, placing a folded document on the table. Her stomach dropped. You wouldn't. He tilted his head slightly. You're a waitress, Clara. Intelligent, capable, wasting your life paying off someone else's mistakes. You deserve more than this. She hesitated, torn between anger and disbelief. What is this exactly? Charity. No, he said. A proposal. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can buy my life because you bought my debt? I'm offering you a position as my personal chef, he said, ignoring the heat in her voice. You'd live in my estate, work directly for me. No late shifts, no broken machines, no collectors at your door. You'll have your freedom, your stability, everything you've been fighting for. Clara laughed, sharp and disbelieving. My freedom? Working for the man who owns my debt? That's your idea of freedom. Adrian didn't flinch. You'll have a contract, complete autonomy in your role. You choose the menu. You decide the hours. I only ask for your trust. Her voice softened despite herself. Why me? He hesitated for the first time. Because the night I met you, I remembered what honesty looks like. Something inside her trembled. She wanted to reject him, to walk away, to keep her pride intact. But her exhaustion was louder than her pride. The past few months had drained her. The double shifts, the threats from collectors, the quiet fear that someday she'd lose everything. Still, her dignity pushed back. "And if I say no, then I'll find another way to help you," he said softly. "Even if you hate me for it." Her throat tightened. "Why? You don't know me." He met her gaze with quiet intensity. "That's not true anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the restaurant faded into a distant blur. Then Clara gathered the papers and handed them back. "I need time." "Take it," he said, "but not too long. The offer expires at midnight tomorrow." He stood to leave, but before he could, she said quietly, "If I do this, I'm not anyone's charity case." He stopped, his back to her. "I know." When he left, the night air felt colder. Clara stood by the window, watching the black car pull away. That night she barely slept. The offer gnawed at her, a way out wrapped in danger. The next morning, her landlord was waiting by her door. "You're 3 weeks late," he said, voice sharp. "I can't wait any longer." Her heart sank. She didn't argue. She couldn't. That afternoon, she walked to the address on Adrian's card, a mansion overlooking the ocean, surrounded by glass walls and silence. The gates opened automatically as she approached. The security guard seemed to have been expecting her. Inside, the house was impossibly vast. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, soft music drifting from invisible speakers, and the faint scent of cedar and sea air. Adrian appeared at the top of the staircase, dressed in white this time. Simple, elegant, disarming. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "Neither did I," she replied. He nodded toward the kitchen. "Come. I'll show you where you'll work." The kitchen was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Gleaming stainless steel, polished granite, rows of copper pans that reflected the sunlight. She ran her fingers across the counter. "This place is too beautiful to cook in." "That's why I don't," he said. She turned to him. "You don't cook?" "I don't eat much," he replied. "Not since—" He stopped himself. "Let's just say, food lost its meaning a long time ago." Clara watched him carefully. "Then why hire me?" He smiled faintly. "Because maybe you can remind me." Something about the way he said it, not a command, not a request, but a quiet confession, made her heart ache. "Tomorrow morning," he said, stepping closer. "Start with whatever you'd make for yourself. No rules, no pretense." As he left the room, the echo of his footsteps lingered like a secret. Clara stood in the silence of the enormous kitchen, staring at her reflection in the steel counter. She had crossed into his world now, a place of wealth and loneliness, of control and quiet pain. She didn't know if she'd regret it, but as she looked out at the sea through the glass walls, one thought kept echoing in her mind. What kind of man forgets how to eat? And why does he want me to remind him? Clara woke before sunrise. The ocean outside Adrian's mansion shimmered beneath a pale blue haze, waves folding softly against the cliffs below. It was the kind of view she had only seen in magazines, the kind that belonged to people who never had to worry about late rent or overdue bills. Yet here she was, barefoot in a stranger's kitchen, preparing to cook for a man who could buy anything but seemed to have lost the ability to feel anything. She tied her apron, took a slow breath, and opened the refrigerator. Everything was immaculate, labeled, aligned, untouched. It didn't feel like a kitchen that had ever been lived in. There were truffles, imported cheeses, and bottles of wine that cost more than her entire month's wages at La Fontaine. But Clara didn't reach for any of that. Instead, she grabbed a few eggs, a loaf of bread, and fresh strawberries. When Adrian entered an hour later, she was plating a simple French toast dusted lightly with powdered sugar. He paused at the doorway, as though surprised to find the air filled with warmth, cinnamon, and something that felt dangerously close to home. "You could have made anything," he said quietly. "Why this?" Clara shrugged. "Because you said to make what I'd make for myself." He sat down, adjusting his cufflinks like a man trying to delay emotion. "And what's special about it?" "It's what I used to make for my brother," she said, her tone steady but soft. "When things were bad. It was cheap, but it tasted like hope." Adrian didn't reply. He lifted his fork, took a bite, and froze. For a moment, his carefully constructed world cracked. Something human flickered across his face. Not pleasure, not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. He set the fork down. "I haven't tasted anything like this in years." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's the point." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, filled with unspoken thoughts neither dared to voice. Then, almost unexpectedly, he said, "Stay, cook for lunch too." She blinked. "I thought this was a test." "It was," he replied. And you passed. From that morning on, Clara became a quiet rhythm in Adrian's life. Every day she prepared meals that seemed to melt the ice around him. Small, human dishes in a house built for perfection. Soups on rainy afternoons. Lemon tarts that filled the halls with warmth. Coffee so rich it lingered in the air like memory. He never spoke much during meals, but his eyes began to soften. The sharp edges in his voice dulled. He started asking questions about her recipes, her life, her dreams. And she learned things about him too, that his mother had been a chef before she died, that his father's empire had crushed any trace of simplicity in their home, that he had grown up surrounded by wealth but starved of affection. One afternoon, as the storm clouds gathered over the sea, Adrian walked into the kitchen holding a folder. "You didn't ask about your contract," he said. "About payment." Clara didn't look up from her cutting board. "I assumed you'd be fair." He raised an eyebrow. "You trust me that easily?" She sliced through a tomato. "I trust what I see. You might hide behind numbers and contracts, but you don't lie when you eat." Adrian stared at her for a long time, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't trust anyone that easily, Clara." She met his gaze. "Then maybe that's what's wrong with you. You don't trust anyone at all." The words hit him like a chord struck deep. He didn't reply, just turned and left the room. But something about the way he paused at the door told her she was right. That evening, the rain came heavy and relentless. The windows trembled under its rhythm, and the sky outside turned the color of bruised steel. Adrian stood by the glass wall, staring into the storm. Clara approached quietly, holding a cup of tea. "You'll catch cold," she said softly. He turned toward her, his reflection fractured by raindrops. "I don't feel things like that anymore." "Then you should start," she said, handing him the cup. "It's a terrible way to live, being untouchable." He studied her, the steam from the tea rising between them like a fragile curtain. "You speak to me like no one else does." "I don't know how else to speak," she said simply. He gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Do you have any idea what kind of man I am?" "I know you're a man who doesn't eat alone anymore," she said. "That's enough." Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no distance and no wealth, no debt, no walls of silence. Just two souls standing in the same quiet storm. He reached out almost instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But the touch lingered too long, too carefully, as though he was touching something fragile, forbidden. She froze, caught between breath and heartbeat. Then the thunder broke, and he pulled back. "I shouldn't," he murmured. Clara stepped away, her pulse trembling. "No, you shouldn't." He nodded, but neither moved for a long time. That night, Clara sat awake in her small guest room, listening to the storm rage outside. She told herself she didn't care, that he was her employer, that whatever kindness he showed came from guilt or loneliness. Not love, but her heart wouldn't listen. It kept replaying the way his voice softened when he said her name. And across the hall, Adrian stood at his window, looking out at the same rain. For years he had believed money could control everything. Power, loyalty, even emotion. But now he was beginning to understand how fragile control really was. He had thought hiring her would help him forget what he'd lost. Instead, it was reminding him what it meant to feel alive again, and as lightning flashed over the sea, he whispered to himself the truth he couldn't say aloud, that the woman cooking in his kitchen had already changed more than his meals. She was changing him. The next morning, sunlight poured through the vast windows, sharp and golden, washing away the storm's memory. But neither Adrian nor Clara could shake what had happened between them the night before, or what almost had. Clara tried to keep busy, chopping vegetables with precision, pretending the tremor in her hands was from the knife, not from his nearness. When Adrian entered the kitchen, she didn't look up. The silence was thick but not empty. It hummed with everything they weren't saying. "You made breakfast already?" he asked, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "Your schedule doesn't wait for emotion," she said softly, arranging slices of toast on a plate. He frowned. "Emotion?" She glanced at him. "Whatever that was last night." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It was nothing." She smiled faintly. "Then you don't have to convince me." He hesitated. For a man used to control, her calmness disarmed him. "You make it sound easy," he said finally. "It's not," she replied. "It's survival." He stared at her a moment longer before stepping closer. "You have a habit of saying things that stay in my head longer than they should." "That's not my fault," she said, turning back to the stove. "You hired me to cook, not to make you think." He let out a short, quiet laugh, one that sounded foreign even to him. It was the first real laugh she'd ever heard from him, and it startled her more than his anger ever had. Maybe I made the wrong hire, he murmured. She looked at him over her shoulder. Or maybe you finally made the right one. Their eyes met again, but this time something softer lived there, something neither wanted to name. The rain returned that night, fierce, relentless, and full of the same ache that gripped Adrian's chest. He stood by the glass wall, his reflection fractured by streaks of water. Somewhere in the distance, Clara's small guest room was dark. Her door had stayed closed since she walked out on him, and the house, once alive with the scent of her cooking, now felt like an echo. He had built empires, negotiated billions, and commanded hundreds of people with a single word. Yet now, a single woman's silence had dismantled his entire world. Down the hall, a soft sound broke through the stillness, the quiet click of a door opening. He turned. Clara stood there, barefoot, wearing a cardigan over her uniform. Her eyes were tired, red from crying. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Finally, she said, "You could have told me." He nodded slowly. "I should have. Why didn't you?" "Because every time I'm honest," he said quietly, "I lose someone." Clara looked at him, her voice trembling. "Maybe that's because you wait until it's too late to tell the truth." The air between them pulsed with the sound of rain. Adrian took a slow step closer. "I bought that restaurant's debt years ago. I never imagined it would bring you here. And yet," she whispered, "you let me walk right into your world without knowing who you were to me." He didn't defend himself. Instead, he looked down, his voice stripped of all its usual power. "When I first saw you there, that night, I didn't see debt. I saw someone who hadn't given up on life, even when the world took everything. I envied that." Something in his tone cracked her resolve. She wanted to stay angry, but the truth in his words disarmed her. "You can't buy redemption with guilt, Adrian." He looked up, meeting her eyes with something that almost looked like pain. "I'm not trying to buy it. I'm trying to earn it." Silence fell again, heavy and human. Then softly, Clara said, "Then start by eating something I make. Not because you paid for it, but because you need it." He nodded once, humbled. "Anything you choose." She turned toward the kitchen without another word. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air a few minutes later. Clara moved around the kitchen with quiet precision, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. Adrian watched from the corner, his tie loosened, his mask slipping further with every passing second. When she placed the bowl in front of him, simple pasta, nothing extravagant, she didn't speak. She sat across from him and waited. He tasted it slowly. It wasn't the food that made him pause this time. It was the feeling, the warmth, spreading through him like forgiveness. She broke the silence first. "You remind me of someone I used to know." He glanced up. "Who?" "My father," she said softly. "He worked himself into the ground to pay for other people's mistakes. And when he couldn't take it anymore, he stopped talking to everyone. Stopped feeling. You have the same look he had at the end." Adrian's hand tightened around the fork. "And what happened to him?" She met his eyes. "He died, owing money to a man who never knew his name." Her words hit him like a physical blow. "Clara, don't," she said gently. "I'm not blaming you. I just wanted you to understand what this kind of power does to people. It turns them into ghosts while they're still breathing." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And you?" She smiled faintly. "I decided I wouldn't become one." He leaned forward, his voice low. "You've done more than that. You've reminded me that I already was one." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, two people standing on opposite sides of the same wound. Days passed, and something began to shift between them. Clara didn't leave. She still worked, still cooked, but there was a new quiet understanding between them. She didn't trust him completely, not yet, but she didn't avoid him either. Adrian, for his part, tried to change in ways he didn't fully understand. He cancelled a deal that would have crushed a small family business. He visited La Fontaine and paid the remaining debt, leaving a note with only 2 words: "It's yours." When he returned home that evening, Clara was already waiting by the dining table. "You did it, didn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She shook her head, a hint of something like a smile at the corner of her lips. "You can't fix everything with money." "I know," he said, "but maybe I can start with something else." "And what's that?" He took a deep breath, listening. Her expression softened. "Then listen to this, I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." He nodded. "I don't want you to forget. I want you to see me trying." For the first time, Clara saw something genuine in his eyes. Not pity, not pride, but humility. The one thing she never expected from a man like him. "Then I'll stay," she said quietly. "But not as your chef, not as someone you owe." He stepped closer, almost afraid to hope. "Then as what?" As someone who believes you can still be better, she said. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something rarer, a second chance wrapped in grace. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, Adrian stood in front of the locked door upstairs, the one Clara had once tried to open. For years, he had kept it sealed, a memorial to everything he'd lost, everything he couldn't forgive himself for. Now, with trembling hands, he turned the handle. Inside, the room smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Framed photos lined the wall. His mother's smile, a childhood kitchen, the woman who'd taught him that food was love long before business made it a currency. He stood there for a long time before whispering, "I'm sorry." Outside, Clara sat in her room, reading, unaware that just down the hall the man she'd forgiven was finally learning how to forgive himself. But as the clock struck midnight, a soft knock echoed at her door. "Clara," it was Adrian's voice, quiet, hesitant, unfamiliar. She opened the door, and what she saw in his face wasn't wealth or pride or control. It was fear, the fear of being known. "I opened it," he said. "The room." Her heart stilled. "And?" He exhaled slowly. "I think it's time you saw it too." Later that day, Adrian had to leave for a meeting downtown. The house felt emptier the moment he was gone. Clara cleaned the counters, hummed softly to herself, and tried not to wonder where he was or who he was when he wasn't this version of himself, the quiet, watchful man who ate her food and asked about her past. When she finally allowed herself to rest, she wandered through the mansion. Every room felt curated like a gallery, art chosen for investment, not emotion, until she reached a locked door on the second floor. Something about it drew her in. The handle was polished but faintly scratched, as if it had been turned countless times without success. She hesitated. Then, before she could pull her hand back, she heard a voice behind her. "Don't." She turned. Adrian stood at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he interrupted. "That room isn't meant to be opened." Her curiosity sharpened. "Why not?" He paused. "Because it's where I keep what I can't forget." The weight in his tone silenced her. She nodded and stepped back. "Then I'll make sure I don't wander again." But his voice softened. "You can wander anywhere, Clara. Just not there." She caught something fragile in his eyes before he turned away, something almost broken. That night, when he returned from his meeting, he found her asleep in the kitchen, her head resting on her folded arms. The smell of rosemary and lemon hung in the air, the last traces of a meal she'd made and forgotten to eat. Adrian stood there quietly for a long moment, studying her, the faint rise and fall of her breath, the way a strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. She looked peaceful, almost untouched by the chaos that ruled his world. He reached out, brushed the strand gently away, then caught himself and froze. What was he doing? He was Adrian Hale, a man who had built walls taller than the empire he ran, but somehow this woman had walked right through them without even trying. When Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open, she found him standing over her. "Mr. Hale?" He straightened instantly. "You fell asleep." She sat up quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said quietly. "You should rest. I'll take care of the cleanup." She blinked. "You? Clean up?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You'd be surprised what I can do when no one's watching." He rolled up his sleeves and began clearing the plates. She watched, amused and touched, all at once. There was something oddly human in the sight of him, the billionaire who probably hadn't washed a dish in 20 years, standing at the sink under the soft hum of kitchen light. "You don't have to," she said gently. "I know," he replied, "but maybe I want to." They worked side by side in silence. The only sound was running water and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. It felt almost like a ritual, two people learning to exist in the same space, without pretending to be anything other than what they were. When the last dish was done, she turned to him. "Why do I feel like you're not used to people staying?" He looked at her, his expression unguarded for once. "Because they don't." Her voice softened. "And why is that?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I never gave them a reason to." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara whispered, "Maybe that's what's changing." He exhaled slowly, the truth of her words sinking into him like warmth after a long winter. But before either could say anything more, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hall. Adrian turned sharply. One of his assistants appeared at the doorway holding a file. "Sir, we need to discuss the Riverside acquisition," the man said briskly. "And there's something urgent about the restaurant loan you purchased last quarter." Clara froze at the words, "restaurant loan." Her pulse spiked. Adrian caught the shift in her face immediately. "What's wrong?" She swallowed hard. "The loan, was it La Fontaine?" He went still. "Yes," he said slowly. "Why?" Her voice broke just enough to betray her. "Because that's where I worked. And that debt is why I'm here." The silence that followed cut deeper than any argument. His assistant shifted uncomfortably, then quietly excused himself. Adrian took a step toward her, but she stepped back. "You knew, didn't you?" "I didn't," he said, his tone sharp with guilt. "Not at first. But you know now," she whispered. "And you didn't say anything, because I didn't want you to hate me." Her eyes glistened. "Then maybe you should have let me decide that myself." She turned and walked out before he could stop her, leaving him standing in his own kitchen, surrounded by the smell of lemon and regret. For the first time in years, Adrian Hale realized what it meant to lose something that wasn't for sale. Clara followed Adrian down the long hallway, her bare feet silent against the marble. The air felt different, heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. When they reached the door, he paused, his hand resting on the polished handle. The faint scent of cedar and dust drifted through the narrow gap. "I haven't opened this room in 7 years, he said quietly. "Not since she died." Clara's chest tightened. "Your mother?" He nodded once. "She was the only person who ever made this house feel like a home. When she passed, I closed this door and made sure it stayed that way." He pushed it open, and a soft creak filled the silence. The room was small, surprisingly human compared to the rest of the mansion. Shelves lined with cookbooks, an old wooden table covered with faded flower stains, a window overlooking the sea. Everything looked untouched, frozen in time. Clara stepped inside, her eyes scanning the photos on the wall. A younger Adrian, maybe 12, covered in cake batter, laughing beside a woman with kind eyes and flower-dusted hands. The warmth in the photo felt alive, echoing faintly through the air. "She taught me everything," Adrian murmured. "How to work hard, how to taste before you judge, how to never let success erase kindness." Clara turned to him. "And you locked all that away?" He looked down. "Because it hurt to remember." She took a step closer. "And now?" He met her gaze, something raw flickering behind his composed expression. "Now it hurts more to forget." They stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had once meant something simple and real. For the first time, Clara didn't see the billionaire everyone else did. She saw the boy in the picture, lost, lonely, and still searching for a way back to himself. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold, his grip hesitant, but he didn't pull away. "She'd be proud of you for opening this," Clara said softly. He shook his head. "She'd be disappointed in who I became." "No," Clara said firmly. "She'd be proud that you're trying again." Her words settled between them like warmth spreading through the room. Adrian's hand tightened slightly around hers. For a fleeting moment, the house didn't feel so empty. Then Clara noticed something, a small leather-bound notebook on the table. "Is this hers?" Adrian nodded. "Her recipe journal. I haven't read it since the funeral." "Maybe you should." He hesitated, then opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten notes, scribbles, sketches, comments like, "Adrian liked this one," and "too much salt," but he smiled anyway. His fingers trembled as he traced the ink. Clara watched quietly as his composure began to fracture. "She used to write about you," she whispered. "She did everything for me," he said, "and I spent my life trying to prove I didn't need her." "Maybe you were just trying to prove it to yourself," Clara said gently. He closed the book and took a deep breath. "When she died, I threw myself into the company. Money was easier than emotion. Numbers don't ask questions." "And I suppose people do," Clara said with a faint smile. He returned it weakly. "Especially one particular waitress who won't stop challenging me." Her smile faded into something softer. "Maybe that's what you needed." He looked at her for a long time before saying quietly, "You remind me of her." Clara's throat tightened. "That's a compliment I don't deserve." "Yes, you do," he said. "You have her eyes, the kind that see through everything." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like a wound starting to close. Then, breaking the stillness, Clara said, "Adrian, I think you should cook something from her journal." He blinked, startled. "Me? You said she taught you how," Clara said, smiling. "Let's bring her back to the kitchen." He almost refused. The words hovered at the edge of his lips. "I don't cook anymore." But instead, he found himself nodding. Within an hour, the kitchen came alive with movement. Adrian chopped. Clara stirred. For once, the house wasn't quiet. It was filled with laughter. Real, unguarded, messy laughter. He burnt the sauce. She teased him about his knife skills, and when he accidentally spilled flour on her apron, she flicked some back at him, her eyes glowing in the golden light. "Careful," he said, smiling. "You're flirting with trouble." She grinned. "I thought you were trouble." "I am," he said softly. "That's why I'm warning you." Their eyes locked, and the moment stretched, long enough to forget the flour on their hands, the mess on the counter, and the distance that used to exist between them. Then Clara looked away, breaking the spell. "We should focus on the food." Adrian nodded, forcing a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. When the dish was done, a simple chicken and lemon risotto taken straight from his mother's journal, they plated it together. Adrian took the first bite, then closed his eyes. "She used to make this for my birthdays," he said quietly. "I forgot how it tasted." Clara smiled. "Now you remember." He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Now I remember everything." She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her, because in his eyes she saw something changing, something breaking open that had been locked for far too long. For the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Hale looked alive. And as they stood there, the scent of lemon and warmth surrounding them, Clara felt her heart betray her resolve. She was falling for him. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, the sound of a phone shattered the stillness. Adrian's expression hardened instantly as he checked the screen. His world, and the real one, was calling him back. He answered. "Yes?" His voice shifted, sharp again, cold. The conversation was brief, but whatever he heard made the color drain from his face. When he hung up, Clara asked, "What happened?" He looked at her, and the warmth in his eyes was gone. "It's about you," he said quietly. "Someone found out who you are." Clara froze. "What do you mean someone found out who I am?" Adrian's jaw tensed as he slipped the phone into his pocket. "A journalist. Someone's been digging through my financial records, my employees, my private life. They traced a debt transfer from La Fontaine, your restaurant, to my company. They know you're here." Her pulse quickened. "And what does that mean?" "It means by morning the story will be everywhere," he said grimly. "The billionaire who hired his own debtor to work in his house, they'll make it sound like I own you." Clara's stomach twisted. "But that's not true." He gave a hollow laugh. "Truth doesn't matter. They'll write what sells." The kitchen that had been filled with laughter hours ago now felt cold again, sterile. Clara leaned against the counter, her hands trembling. "So what do we do?" "I'll handle it," he said, his voice slipping into the old commanding tone, the one that had built his empire. "You don't talk to anyone. No statements, no interviews. I'll make it disappear." She looked at him sharply. "Make it disappear? You mean buy it off like everything else?" His eyes met hers. "That's how the world works, Clara." "Maybe your world," she said, her voice breaking, "but not mine." He stepped closer. "You don't understand what's at stake." "No," she whispered. "I do. Your terrified people will see who you really are, a man who's capable of good, but too afraid to be honest about it." His jaw tightened. "And what about you? You think you can stand in this world without getting your hands dirty?" "I already have," she said quietly. "Every time I scrubbed plates to pay someone else's debt, every time I smiled through humiliation, that's what survival looks like where I come from." Her words cut deeper than she knew. He looked at her for a long time, his composure unraveling inch by inch. Then softly he said, "I didn't mean for this to happen. Any of it." Clara blinked back tears. "Neither did I." They stood in silence, the rain starting again outside, gentle this time, like the sky itself was tired of watching them fight. Finally she turned away. "I should leave before things get worse." Adrian reached out instinctively, catching her wrist. "You walk out that door and they'll destroy you." She pulled her hand free. "Then maybe they'll destroy the version of me I never wanted to be. The one who lives in someone else's house pretending it's freedom." He didn't stop her. He couldn't. She packed what little she owned, and by dawn, she was gone. The article hit the next day. "Debt, Desire and Deception. The Waitress in the Billionaire's Mansion." It was cruel, invasive, filled with lies that twisted their story into something sordid. They painted Clara as a manipulator, a woman who used pity to climb into Adrian Hale's private world. And him? They made him a fool, a man undone by weakness disguised as compassion. The public devoured it. By noon, reporters swarmed the gates of his estate. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, "Mr. Hale, is it true you paid off her debt for personal reasons? Was this a romantic affair or an arrangement? Is she still in the house?" She wasn't. Adrian sat in his office, staring at the headlines, Each word was a knife, but not because of what they said about him. He was used to that. It was because of what they said about her. He slammed his fist against the desk. Papers scattered. The phone buzzed again, his publicist, his lawyers, his investors, all demanding explanations, control, silence. But all Adrian could think about was the look on Clara's face when she left. 3 days passed before he found her. A small diner on the outskirts of town, not much more than flickering neon and peeling paint. She was behind the counter, hair tied back, pouring coffee for an elderly couple. She looked tired but peaceful, the kind of peace that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with choosing her own air to breathe. When she saw him walk in, her smile faltered. "Adrian," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked. No makeup, no fancy kitchen, no walls between them. Just her, standing where she belonged, doing what she loved. "I read the article," he said finally. She sighed. "I told you not to try fixing it." "I didn't," he said. "I let them print it. Every lie, every insult." She frowned. "Why?" "Because the only way to prove them wrong is to keep living," he said softly. "Not hiding, not controlling the story, just living the truth." She crossed her arms, studying him. "And what truth is that?" He took a step closer. "That I care about you, that somewhere between all the noise and the walls I built, you made me remember what being human feels like." Her breath caught. "Adrian, don't—" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he interrupted. "I just needed to say it out loud before I lose the chance." Clara looked away, tears threatening. "You don't understand. My life isn't like yours. I can't afford another mistake. You can vanish behind lawyers." "I can't vanish from my name," he nodded slowly. "Then I'll be the one who vanishes." She looked up, startled. "I'm selling the company," he said. "All of it. The shares, the assets. I'll keep enough to live, but not enough to own anyone ever again." She stared at him in disbelief. "You'd give all that up? For what?" "For peace," he said. "For something real." She shook her head, torn between admiration and fear. "You don't need to destroy yourself to change, Adrian." "Maybe not," he said, "but I need to stop pretending that power is the same as purpose." Their eyes met again, not as billionaire and waitress, but as two people standing in the ruins of their pride, realizing maybe it was the only place love could start. But before either could say another word, the door burst open. A man stepped in, one of Adrian's board members, drenched from the rain, holding a folder. "Adrian," he said urgently, "you can't do this. Selling everything will collapse Hale Enterprises, hundreds of jobs." "I know," Adrian said calmly. "That's why I'm giving it to the employees." The man stared. "You've lost your mind." Adrian looked at Clara, then back at the man. "No," he said softly. "I finally found it." And as the door swung shut behind them, Clara stood frozen, the echo of his words settling deep in her chest, like the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name. Because somewhere between power and ruin, she had started to love him too. 4:39, Hove, 10:20, 25. Philippe Goulart. Clara froze. "What do you mean, someone found out who I am?" Adrian's jaw tensed as he slipped the phone into his pocket. "A journalist. Someone's been digging through my financial records, my employees, my private life. They traced a debt transfer from La Fontaine, your restaurant, to my company. They know you're here." Her pulse quickened. "And what does that mean?" "It means by morning the story will be everywhere," he said grimly. "The billionaire who hired his own debtor to work in his house? They'll make it sound like I own you." Clara's stomach twisted. "But that's not true." He gave a hollow laugh. "Truth doesn't matter. They'll write what sells." The kitchen that had been filled with laughter hours ago now felt cold again, sterile. The next morning, the world called him reckless. News anchors debated his sanity. Investors called it betrayal. But Adrian didn't care. For the first time in years, he woke up with no agenda, no meetings, no lies to maintain. Just silence, and the faint memory of Clara's voice in the diner. He walked out of his penthouse with nothing but a duffel bag. The luxury car stayed in the garage. He took a cab instead, something he hadn't done since he was 19. The driver glanced at him through the mirror, then back to the road. "You look familiar," the man said. "Aren't you that billionaire who gave everything away?" Adrian smiled faintly. "Something like that." The cab rolled past the city he used to own, skyscrapers he had built, restaurants he had financed, streets that used to whisper his name. Now no one cared, and that somehow was freedom. When he reached the diner again, the morning crowd had already filled the booths. Clara was behind the counter, wiping it down, humming softly under her breath. She didn't see him walk in. She was focused, calm, radiant, alive. He waited until she looked up. When their eyes met, she froze. "Adrian," he gave a small smile. "You look happy." Her expression shifted, cautious, searching. "You really did it." He nodded. "Everything. The company's gone. My board hates me. My name's probably dirt in every newspaper by now." She shook her head slowly, disbelief and admiration mingling in her voice. "You actually did it." "I meant what I said," he replied quietly. "I wanted peace. I wanted this." Clara hesitated. "You think giving everything up makes you a better man?" He looked at her, steady and unflinching. "No. I think learning what I can live without does." There was no pride in his tone, no performance, just truth. And for Clara, that was harder to face than all his arrogance ever had been. She sighed. "Adrian, I didn't ask you to change your life for me." "I know," he said, "but you made me want to." The simplicity of the words silenced her. She turned away, busying herself with a stack of plates that didn't need cleaning. "You don't belong here," she said. "Not in this world." He leaned against the counter, his voice low. "Then tell me where I do belong." She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The bell above the door jingled and customers walked in, a family, laughing, wet from the rain. Clara smiled at them instinctively, taking their order, laughing at their jokes. Adrian watched her move, graceful, kind, completely unaware of how magnetic she was. When the rush ended, he was still there, waiting. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "There's a park nearby." After my shift, he stayed, all day, watching her. Not as a man used to being served, but as someone in awe of a life he'd never noticed before. The rhythm of people, the simplicity of kindness exchanged over cups of coffee. By the time her shift ended, the sky was pink with the last traces of sunset. They walked in silence through the park until they reached a small bench overlooking the lake. Clara sat, arms crossed against the chill. "You really meant to disappear from your world, didn't you?" "I didn't disappear," he said. "I just stopped pretending to live in it." She looked at him, torn between admiration and fear. "And what happens now? You think you can just start over?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But for once, I'm not afraid of not knowing." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. She turned her gaze to the lake. "I spent years working to pay off other people's mistakes," she said softly. "And now, for the first time, mine might be falling for someone who doesn't fit in my world either." He looked at her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe that's what makes it real." The wind picked up, tossing her hair gently across her face. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked a strand behind her ear. She didn't pull away this time. "Clara," he said quietly, "when I first met you, you made me feel small. You looked at me like I wasn't untouchable. No one's ever done that before." She smiled faintly. "That's because you aren't." He chuckled softly. "No, not anymore." Their laughter faded into quiet, and the distance between them narrowed. His hand brushed hers, tentative at first, then certain. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You lost everything, Adrian." He met her eyes steady. "No, I finally found something worth keeping." And before she could respond, he kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded anything. It asked. It trembled. It broke the silence that had lived between them for too long. When they finally pulled apart, her eyes glistened. "You can't stay in my world forever," she whispered. "Then I'll build a bridge between ours," he said. "Something simple, something real." She shook her head, half smiling through her tears. "You don't even know how." "Then you'll teach me," he replied. They sat there as the last light faded, two silhouettes against a world that no longer cared about their differences. For the first time, the gap between them didn't feel impossible. It felt human. And somewhere in that quiet, under the hum of distant city lights and the whisper of wind through the trees, both of them understood. Love wasn't something you found in the life you had. It was what remained after everything else was gone. But even as they sat together in that fragile peace, Adrian's phone buzzed again, a single message lighting up the screen. His eyes darkened as he read it. Clara noticed instantly. "What is it?" He hesitated. "It's from my lawyer. The company sale, something went wrong." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He turned the screen toward her. One line glowed in bold letters. "The transfer's been blocked. Someone's trying to stop you." Adrian stared at the message, the glow of the phone screen flickering across his face. For a moment, the calm he'd fought so hard to build cracked, the past pulling at him like a tide. Clara could see it happening, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes hardened as if old ghosts had found their way back. "Who would do that?" she asked quietly. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool evening air. "Someone with power. Someone who thinks I belong to the world I left behind. Then don't let them pull you back," she said firmly. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty where arrogance used to live. "It's not that simple, Clara. If they stop the sale, I'll still own the company, and if I still own it, nothing changes." She took his hand, grounding him. "Then change something else. Change what can't be owned." The simplicity of her words cut through his panic. For a long moment, Adrian just stared at her. This woman who had come from everything he once looked down on and somehow taught him what freedom meant. "Clara," he said softly, "when I lost everything, I thought I'd finally be at peace. But I was wrong." She frowned. "Wrong about what?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Peace doesn't come from losing things. It comes from having one thing you'd never trade for anything." Her throat tightened. "And what's that?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "You." The words broke through her defenses, sharp and honest. She blinked away the tears threatening to fall, but one escaped anyway. "You don't even know if I can fit into your life." He smiled faintly. "That's the point. I don't want you to fit into it. I want to build a new one with you." Clara let out a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half awe. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted, "but the hardest things are usually the ones that matter most." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still joined, the lake reflecting the soft lights of the city in ripples of gold. Then Adrian's phone buzzed again, another message from his lawyer. He hesitated before reading it. Clara watched his expression shift, from tension to confusion, then relief. "What?" she asked. He handed her the phone. The message read, "The board backed down. The transfer is cleared. Hale Enterprises now officially belongs to its employees." Clara's eyes widened. "It worked?" He nodded slowly, almost in disbelief. "It's done. I don't own them anymore." A long breath escaped him, like the first one he'd taken in years. "For the first time," he said softly, "I'm free." Clara smiled, tears glinting under the fading light. "Then maybe now you'll finally learn how to live." He laughed quietly, his voice breaking with emotion. "If I'm lucky, you'll teach me that too." She shook her head, smiling through the tears. "You don't need me to teach you. You just need to stop being afraid of simple things." "Like what?" "Like breakfast that burns a little, rain that ruins your suit, people who don't need anything from you." He looked at her, smiling faintly. "And love that doesn't come with conditions." She met his gaze. "Exactly that." Adrian leaned closer, his voice low. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life learning it." Their lips met, not out of desperation, but of surrender. It was a slow, tender kiss, the kind that seals something deeper than a promise, the kind that said we made it through. When they pulled apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. "So what now?" He smiled. "Now we start small. Maybe I learn to cook something that doesn't involve a business plan." She laughed softly. "You'll burn the kitchen down. Then you'll have to stay and stop me." Her laughter turned into quiet warmth. "I might." He tilted his head, his expression soft. "You already have." Months later, the world had moved on from the story of the billionaire who gave it all away. The newspapers called it madness at first, then redemption, then legend. But for Adrian and Clara, it became something simpler, a new life that didn't need headlines to mean something. They moved into a small house by the sea, one with chipped paint, a noisy kettle, and a kitchen that smelled of lemon and rosemary. She cooked, he learned. They argued over how much salt was too much, and sometimes late at night when the world was quiet, he'd look at her across the table and realize he had finally built the one thing money could never buy: peace and love that stayed. Before the credits of their quiet life rolled on, before the waves drowned the echoes of what they used to be, Adrian looked at her one last time that night and said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, smiling. "For finding me when I didn't even know I was lost." If you believe that love still changes people, subscribe and stay with us, because some stories aren't about wealth or status. They're about hearts brave enough to start over.